On New Year's Eve, 1973, three men walked into a party at a 6-story building on East 3rd Street in Manhattan. They were wearing the wrong colors. Within hours, a chain of events began that would trigger a biker war lasting over 50 years, produce hundreds of dead bodies across 2 countries, and transform American motorcycle gangs from drunken brawlers into organized crime empires worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And that party, that was just one night, one incident, one spark in a decade full of gasoline. The 1970s were the decade when outlaw motorcycle clubs stopped playing outlaw and actually became the real thing. They built drug empires, forged alliances with the Italian Mafia, recruited combat veterans fresh from Vietnam, and fought territorial wars with bombs, ambushes, and assassinations. 7 clubs rose above the rest, 7 organizations that didn't just ride across America, they controlled pieces of it. And most people have never heard the full story of how they did it. So let's get into it. We're counting from number 7 to number 1, and by the time we reach the top of this list, you'll understand why the FBI, the ATF, and the Department of Justice eventually classified these motorcycle clubs in the same category as the Mafia and international drug cartels. Number 7, the Vagos Motorcycle Club. Now, the Vagos don't get the same press as some of the bigger names, and that's exactly what made them dangerous. The Vagos were founded in San Bernardino, California in 1965. Their patch is a red-winged Norse god named Loki on a green background, which is why law enforcement eventually started calling them the Green Nation. By the mid-70s, the Vagos had planted chapters across California, into Nevada, and down toward the Mexican border. And that border proximity, that became their entire business model. While other clubs were cooking methamphetamine in backyard labs and dealing out of clubhouses, the Vagos figured out early that the real money was in cross-border smuggling. They built drug pipelines running narcotics north from Mexico through the California and Arizona deserts. The U.S. Department of Justice would later identify them as a serious criminal threat in the Pacific and Southwest regions, citing involvement in methamphetamine production, marijuana distribution, assault, extortion, money laundering, murder, and weapons violations. But in the 70s, they were still flying under federal radar. Nobody was watching. And for a criminal organization, invisibility is worth more than firepower. The Vagos also had something most clubs didn't: patience. They weren't trying to conquer the entire country. They picked their territory, locked it down, and defended it quietly. That strategy kept them alive while flashier clubs drew heat from law enforcement. And it set a pattern you're going to see repeated throughout this list. The 70s rewarded clubs that combined violence with discipline. Number 6 is one that most people have genuinely never heard of: the Sons of Silence. And their obscurity was their greatest weapon. Founded in Newark, Colorado in 1966, the Sons of Silence built one of the most disciplined outlaw motorcycle organizations in the country from a place nobody expected. Colorado. Not California, not New York, not Texas, a quiet mountain state in the middle of the country. And yet the Department of Justice eventually named them alongside the Hells Angels, the Bandidos, the Mongols, and the Outlaws as organizations posing a serious national domestic threat. That's a club from a small Colorado town being classified with groups that have thousands of members worldwide. By the 70s, the Sons of Silence had around 30 chapters spread across a dozen states, with roughly 250 to 275 members. Those are small numbers compared to the giants on this list, but what they lacked in manpower, they compensated for with a level of operational security that frustrated every law enforcement agency that tried to penetrate them. Their members were implicated in murder, assault, drug trafficking, weapons violations, extortion, prostitution, money laundering, and motorcycle theft. They also did something almost no other American club managed in this era. They expanded internationally, establishing chapters in Germany. That gave them access to European drug markets and criminal networks at a time when most American clubs couldn't see past their own state borders. The Sons of Silence operated in that dangerous sweet spot, large enough to project real power, small enough to avoid the massive federal investigations that were starting to catch up with the bigger clubs. In the 70s, when law enforcement was still trying to figure out how to even categorize motorcycle gang crime, That kind of invisibility wasn't just an advantage, it was a survival strategy. Number 5. The Mongols. And this is where the story gets genuinely compelling, because the Mongols were born out of something the other clubs on this list helped create: exclusion. December 5th, 1969. A group of Hispanic Vietnam veterans in Montebello, California, wanted into the outlaw motorcycle world. There was just one problem. The Hells Angels, who controlled most of California at the time, wouldn't accept non-white members. So these men, combat veterans who had fought and bled for the United States in the jungles of Southeast Asia, some of them having done multiple tours, came home to find that the motorcycle clubs celebrating American freedom wouldn't let them through the door because of their skin color. So they built their own door. They named the club after Genghis Khan and the Mongol warriors, forces that were small in number but devastating in battle. The first national president, Luis Costello, chose that name deliberately. The founding sergeant-at-arms, Alfonso Big Al Aceves, had completed 3 tours with the 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam. These weren't men playing outlaw. They had already lived through worse than anything a motorcycle club could throw at them. The Mongols voted to become a full 1%er outlaw club in 1974. Then they started expanding aggressively, pulling in recruits from the California Men's Colony Prison in San Luis Obispo. Within a decade of their founding, they had chapters across Los Angeles, the San Gabriel Valley, San Fernando Valley, Long Beach, San Diego, and Bakersfield. They were growing fast, and they were growing angry. The collision with the Hells Angels was inevitable. In 1977, a brawl erupted between the two clubs at a swap meet in Anaheim. Nobody died, but the fuse was lit. Later that same year, on September 5, 1977, Mongol President Emerson Morris and member Raymond Smith were riding home from a bike run when they were ambushed. A group of Hells Angels opened fire. Both Morris and Smith were killed. That double murder launched a war over the methamphetamine trade in Southern California that would rage for decades. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives would eventually call the Mongols the most violent and dangerous outlaw motorcycle gang in the nation. A club that was born because American institutions rejected the men who served them became one of the most feared criminal organizations in the country. There's something deeply American about that story, even if it's not the version of America anyone wants to admit exists. Number 4, the Pagans. And if the Mongols were violent, the Pagans operated on a level that made other outlaw clubs that were themselves full of hardened criminals, genuinely afraid. The Pagans started as something completely unremarkable. Founded in 1959 by a Navy veteran named Lou Dobkin in Prince George's County, Maryland, the original club had just 13 members. They wore blue denim jackets, rode Triumph motorcycles, and weren't particularly violent. Just a group of guys riding together on weekends. That changed around 1965. After a series of incidents at motorcycle races and gatherings, newspapers branded the Pagans as part of the 1% of motorcyclists who cause problems. Instead of denying the label, they embraced it. The Pagans actually claimed to have invented the 1%er diamond patch, the symbol that every outlaw motorcycle club in the world would eventually adopt as a badge of honor. They took a newspaper insult and turned it into an identity. Their patch told you everything about who they were becoming. It featured Sir Tior, the Norse fire giant from mythology, sitting on a burning world and wielding a flaming sword. And here's the detail that always gets me. The image was lifted directly from a Jack Kirby illustration in issue 97 of the Marvel comic book Journey into Mystery. A comic book character became the symbol of the most dangerous criminal organization on the East Coast. But the real transformation came under one man, John Satan Moran. Moran had been running a support club called the Sons of Satan before rising through the ranks to become the Pagans' national president. Under his leadership, the Pagans exploded in size, growing to nearly 5,000 members in the early 1970s. 5,000 patch members. That's not a motorcycle club. That's a small army. The Pagans dominated the entire mid-Atlantic and northeastern United States. They were the only major outlaw club operating in that region, and they used that monopoly ruthlessly. What truly set them apart, though, was their relationship with traditional organized crime. the Pagans had documented ties to La Cosa Nostra, the Italian Mafia, in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and New York City. They helped enforce gambling debts, ran protection rackets, and operated multi-state drug distribution networks. In 1976, the Pagans' National Sergeant-at-Arms, Kirby Bear Keller, was indicted by a federal grand jury for operating a drug ring that spanned 5 states. And unlike most motorcycle clubs that had a fixed mother chapter headquarters, the Pagans' leadership operated from a floating, undisclosed location. Their governing body was always exactly 13 people, a deliberate choice rooted in their founding number. No fixed address, no permanent base, 13 men running an empire from the shadows. Law enforcement hated it because it made the organization almost impossible to target with traditional surveillance. Number 3. The Bandidos Motorcycle Club. And now we head to Texas because the Bandidos were as Texan as barbecue, barbed wire, and doing things your own way regardless of what anyone else thinks. March 4th, 1966. San Leon, Texas. A 36-year-old dock worker and Marine Corps veteran named Donald Eugene Chambers decided that every motorcycle club in America was too tame for him. Chambers had served in Vietnam and come home to a life of manual labor on the Houston docks. He wanted something harder, something that lived by its own rules. So he founded the Bandidos, naming them after the Mexican bandits he admired, men who answered to nobody. He chose red and gold as the club's colors, deliberately matching the United States Marine Corps. The logo, a cartoon of a stout Mexican bandit wearing a sombrero and carrying a machete and pistol, became one of the most recognized emblems in the outlaw world. And the club's motto? "We are the people our parents warned us about." That line tells you everything. Chambers recruited from biker bars across South Texas, Houston, Corpus Christi, Galveston, San Antonio. By the early 70s, the Bandidos had over 100 members, and a significant portion of them were Vietnam veterans. These were men who understood weapons, tactics, discipline, and violence on a level that most civilians couldn't comprehend. That military foundation gave the Bandidos a structural advantage that other clubs had to learn the hard way. Then came the event that changed the Bandidos forever. In 1972, 2 drug dealers in El Paso, Texas, sold a Bandidos member $1,000 worth of what they claimed was methamphetamine. It was baking soda. When Chambers found out, he didn't file a complaint. He personally led the kidnapping of those 2 dealers. Both men were killed. Chambers was convicted of murder and received 2 consecutive life sentences. With the founder in prison, leadership passed to Ronald Jerome Hodge, another former Marine. Hodge had earned his full membership patch in a single month, record time, which got him the nickname Mr. Prospect. When he took the presidency, he adopted the name Stepmother, a tribute to Chambers' club nickname of Mother. That kind of continuity, that reverence for the chain of command, tells you a lot about how the Bandidos saw themselves. Under Hodge, the Bandidos transformed from a regional Texas club into a structured national organization. He installed regional vice presidents, mandated regular meetings, and built a governance framework that would eventually support international expansion. By the end of the 70s, the Bandidos were positioned to become one of the largest motorcycle clubs on the planet, with operations that would extend across 22 countries. The Bandidos incorporated in Texas as a non-profit organization in 1978. A non-profit, an organization whose founder was serving life for double murder, registered with the state of Texas as a charitable entity. That's the kind of audacity that defined the 70s biker world. Number 2, the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. And if you want to talk about history, credentials, and sheer longevity, the Outlaws have every other club on this list beat by decades. The Outlaws were founded in McCook, Illinois in 1935. Let that sink in for a moment. 1935. That's 13 years before the Hells Angels existed. The founding members were employees of the Electromotive Company, and they started the club at a bar called Matilda's, sitting right on Route 66. The club went dormant during World War II, reformed afterwards, and attended the first major post-war motorcycle rally at Soldier Field in Chicago in May of 1946. By 1964, the Outlaws had absorbed clubs from upstate New York, Milwaukee, and Louisville, Kentucky, making them the largest one-percenter organization east of the Mississippi River. Their logo, a skull and cross pistons that members called Charlie, became synonymous with outlaw motorcycle culture in the Midwest and South. Their motto, God forgives, outlaws don't. They abbreviated it GFOD and wore it on their cuts like a warning label. The 70s, though, nearly destroyed them from the inside before any rival could. Early in the decade, a power struggle erupted within the club between two factions, a group of traditional beer drinkers and a rival faction of marijuana smokers who wanted to take the club in a different direction. This wasn't a philosophical debate, it was a shooting war. Several members were killed, including John Davis, one of the club's reputed founders, who was murdered by the pot-smoking faction. The oldest outlaw club in the world was tearing itself apart over what intoxicants to use. Once that internal bloodbath settled, the Outlaws turned their attention outward, and they collided head-on with the Hells Angels. The catalyst was that New Year's Eve party in 1973 that we talked about at the top of this video. 3 outlaws from Florida walked into the Hells Angels New York headquarters. What exactly happened inside that building depends on whose version you believe, but certain accounts indicate the Outlaws assaulted the partner of the local Angels chapter president. Whatever the truth, by 1974, the Outlaws and the Hells Angels were in open warfare. The Outlaws didn't just fight back, they declared total war with their vocabulary. They patched their vests with AHAMD, all Hells Angels must die. They wore the acronym A.D.I.O.S, which looked like the Spanish word for goodbye, but actually stood for Angels Die in outlaw states. These weren't idle threats. Bombings, shootings, and ambushes followed. The Outlaws adopted the Nazi-style double lightning bolt as a tattoo awarded to members who had killed for the club. In 1977, the Outlaws pushed into Canada, challenging the Hells Angels on their turf north of the border. They patched over large portions of Satan's Choice, which was one of the biggest Canadian motorcycle clubs, instantly creating a power base that threatened Angel dominance in Quebec and Ontario. The resulting biker wars in Canada became among the most violent organized crime conflicts in that country's history. By the end of the 70s, the Outlaws had 441 chapters spread across 43 countries, with a global membership exceeding 5,000. The world's oldest outlaw motorcycle club had evolved into the world's second largest criminal motorcycle organization, and their war with the Hells Angels showed no signs of ending. It still hasn't. And finally, number 1. The club that everybody watching this video already knew would be here, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. The Hells Angels were founded in Fontana, California in 1948 by World War II veterans who named the club after a famous B-17 bomber group. Through the 50s and into the 60s, they built a reputation as the wildest, most unpredictable motorcycle club in America. Hunter S. Thompson lived with them and wrote a best-selling book about them. They provided security at the Altamont Music Festival in 1969, where an 18-year-old concert-goer named Meredith Hunter was stabbed to death during a Rolling Stones performance. The Hells Angels were terrifying, but they were also chaotic, undisciplined, and mostly local. The 1970s changed all of that, and the man who engineered the transformation was Robert Barger, president of the Oakland chapter and the de facto leader of the entire organization. Canadian investigative journalist Julian Schur, who spent years studying the Angels, quoted Barger directly on what the 70s meant for the club. Barger acknowledged that in the 60s, the Angels were about having a good time. By the 70s, they had evolved into something far more calculated. Barger understood something that none of the other club leaders on this list fully grasped later, that the drug trade, which the Angels had always treated as a casual side business, could become the foundation of a criminal empire. Methamphetamine was the product. The Angels didn't just distribute it, they manufactured it, controlled the supply chain, and defended their territory with military-grade violence. But the key innovation wasn't the drugs, it was the structure. Barger imposed geographic boundaries. Each chapter controlled a specific city or section of a city. He demanded financial discipline, regular reporting, and strict obedience to the chain of command. The club started keeping records, managing money, and operating with a level of sophistication that journalist Julian Schur eventually compared to a global franchise operation. Then came the expansion. Throughout the 70s, the Hells Angels spread across the United States by absorbing existing motorcycle clubs through a process called patching over. The Angels would approach a local club and make an offer, take the Hells Angels patch and become part of the organization, or prepare for conflict. The New York chapter was established in December of 1969 when the Angels absorbed the Aliens motorcycle gang. The Binghamton chapter followed in 1975. Troy came in 1978. The New York operation became one of the Angels' crown jewels. Operating from a 6-story building at 77 East 3rd Street in Manhattan's East Village, the New York chapter coordinated Hells Angels activities across the entire eastern seaboard, into Canada, and across to Europe. They built working relationships with the Gambino and Genovese Mafia families. The U.S. Customs Service documented cases in which the New York Angels partnered directly with the Medellin cartel for cocaine smuggling. They also ran methamphetamine distribution, marijuana importation from Canada through the St. Lawrence corridor, and weapons trafficking. In 1979, the federal government took its biggest swing at the Angels when prosecutors filed one of the first major RICO cases in American history against the club. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act had been on the books since 1970, but had rarely been used. Prosecutors gathered evidence for years, but the trial was a disaster. It ended in 2 hung juries. Jurors were troubled by revelations that the government had used paid informants who committed more crimes than the defendants, and that an undercover agent named Scott Barnes had allegedly planted evidence and installed illegal surveillance equipment. When the judge asked federal prosecutor Robert Mueller, yes, that Robert Mueller, whether the government planned to retry the case, Mueller responded that there would be no retrial. The RICO case failed, but it marked a turning point. The federal government had publicly declared that the Hells Angels were not a motorcycle club, they were an organized crime enterprise. And by the end of the 70s, the Angels had chapters on nearly every continent, a membership that dwarfed every other outlaw club, and an income stream from the drug trade that funded everything from legal defense teams to international expansion. The 1970s took the Hells Angels from dangerous rebels to professional criminals. From counterculture icons to what law enforcement started calling the McDonald's of organized crime, a franchise model of criminal enterprise that could be replicated in any city, in any country, anywhere in the world. So there it is. 7 motorcycle gangs that shaped the 1970s in ways that most history books will never acknowledge. From the quiet border operations of the Vagos to the invisible discipline of the Sons of Silence. From the combat veterans the Mongols turned away by racism into a fighting force. From the Mafia-connected Pagans ruling the East Coast to the Bandidos building a Texas empire from a dockworker's rage. From the Outlaws, the oldest outlaw club in existence, declaring total war on the biggest, and the Hells Angels sitting at the top, transforming themselves into a criminal corporation that still operates in 66 countries today. Every single one of these organizations was forged in the 70s. The wars they started are still burning. The structures they built are still standing. And the America they operated in, a country where combat veterans came home with nothing, where blue-collar workers had no voice, where the law couldn't keep up with men who made their own rules, that America hasn't changed as much as we'd like to believe. More stories from the decade that changed motorcycling forever are coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss them.